Hello friends, welcome to ELS English Literature Studies with Kaur Harpreet. Today I will discuss In Memoriam by Alfred Lord Tennyson. In my previous video I have discussed prologue and epilogue. If you want you can check that video, and today I will discuss its cantos, that is canto 1 to canto 15, right? And friends, let me tell you that if you want to know more about Tennyson and his poems and other cantos of this poem, you can mail me on the email address given in the description box. You can get written notes there, right? So let's get started with today's topic. This is canto 1 and these are the lines. You can read it yourself. I will just explain it. Canto 1. In this, the poet appeals to God to make him wise, right? This grief for his dead friend ills the poet's heart. The poet once thought that men could rise on stepping stones when he says of their dead selves to higher things. But now it is hard to contemplate the reality of loss which he has faced, and find any gain within it. The poet here once believed that men would rise on stepping stones, right? And he believed that men would rise on stepping stones from death to become something more. He showed his faith in God, whom he presents in the image of someone singing to one harp with many voices. Here is the word diverse. To one clear harp in diverse tone. Diverse here means it means diverse. It is not a group of people who like to dive, but diverse means diverse tones, right? And the poet's grief is too much. He mixes love and grief. He argues that it is better to be all dark and intoxicated with grief than to let time win. Tennyson is definitely struggling with that old saying, it is better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all, right? Next is canto number 2. Here now Tennyson addresses an old yew tree that grows over some headstones. Its roots are wrapping around the dead man's head and bones, and the season will allow the tree to flower again, right? Not even the wind or the sun can do much damage to the tree, this tree which will live for 1,000 years. Now here Tennyson is using apostrophe to address the tree, speaking directly to it. He continues to address the tree, personifying it by calling it sullen, right? And which sullen means stubborn. And this old yew tree has deep bones in the earth. The season changes and the clock ticks away the hours of man, but the tree never changes. And when the poet gazes on this sullen tree, stubborn tree, he admires its stubborn hardihood, right? And he sees his own self mingling with this tree. An old tree like this tree, it has deep bones in the earth, and the season change, and it is still there. And Tennyson here describes the outside world in a way that reflects his own inner mood, and from this we get a sense that Tennyson is so sad over his friend's death, right? And he is grieving so much that he loses the sense of himself and grows bodiless like a tree. And here the speaker imagining being one with the tree in this canto, right? Next is canto number 3. Canto number 3. Oh sorrow, cruel fellowship. Sorrow whispers terrible things in the poet's ears. It is sorrow. Sorrow suggests that blind fate rules the destiny of man as well as nature. Now, in this canto, Tennyson personifies sorrow and again uses apostrophe. He characterizes sorrow as a deceitful priestess of death. There is also an oxymoron going on here, right? And she offers the speaker fellowship, that is cruel and sweetness and bitterness in the same breath. When he says oh sweet and bitter in a breath, means sweetness and bitterness is shown in the same breath. She's also telling him that the stars move blindly. The stars blindly run. The stars move blindly, not because of any purpose. And the poet follows this up with Thoreau's statement that nature is a phantom. Here, nature acts as a phantom and that she has empty hands, right? Somewhere it seems like that Thoreau is trying to get him to believe there is nothing guiding the universe. The word hollow that is used is important here, right? A hollow echo of my own, a hollow form with empty hands. Tennyson asks himself if he will give in to sorrow or he should instead crush her upon his mind. He is definitely having a struggle here that is kicked off by the grief he is feeling, right? Canto number 4. During sleep, here Tennyson writes, to sleep I give my parts away, my will is bondsman to the dark. During sleep, grief for his dead friend overpowers him, right? He gives his parts away. His heart muses on the memory of his loss of his friend, and these thoughts he see before himself with his closed eyes at night. When he wakes, his will warns him not to be the fool of loss. He says, thou shalt not be the fool of loss. When he wakes, his will warns him not to be the fool of loss, that he should live in the current position, right? He should not so much live in so much grief at the loss of his friend's death. Now Tennyson is talking to his heart. Apparently his heart doesn't know what is missing and doesn't know why it is not beating as strongly as it once did. When he says, what is it makes me beat so low? He doesn't know what is the reason. And he wants to be able to cry about this, but his tears are locked in a deep vase of chilling tears that has been frozen. Chilling tears means that are frozen. When morning comes and he wakes up and his willpower takes over, he doesn't want to play the fool for his feelings of grief. Canto number 5. He considered it a sin to write about his grief, right? Because words can't really convey the truth, what he is feeling. He says that I sometimes hold it half a sin to put in words the grief I feel. He feels that he is committing a sin when he write about the grief, right? And the poet believes that sometimes it is pointless to use mere words to express grief because they can only half reveal the soul. Half conceal the soul within. However, for a tortured heart, words are a mechanical exercise that can numb the dull pain. He will wrap himself in words, although they can only suggest the outline of his grief. Writing poetry gives him some pain relief, right? And he's here comparing the mechanic exercise or precision involved in writing poetry to the feeling you get when you use narcotics, right? And it is taking his mind off things. He's going to wrap himself in words like a set of coarsest clothes that will protect him from the cold, right? And he's only going to be able to give an outline of his grief in words, though since it is so difficult to convey. Firstly, he thinks that he is committing a sin, that he expressing his grief in these words, and later on he says that his words are like coarsest clothes. The clothes which protect us from cold, his words are like that, right? He's only trying to give an outline of his true grief in through these words, right? Next is Canto 6, where he says, one writes that other friends remain, that loss is common to the race. In this, he says that people says the other friends remain, that why he is feeling so much in pain, why he is so much in pain when he has other friends are there, he has something with him, but he says that loss is common to the race. It is for him, his friend is more than him, right? Let me explain that in Canto 6, the poet's grief for his deceased friend does not lessen. A father waits for his son to come home, but he is short and eyes. A mother waits for sailor's son, but he drowns. A young woman waits for her lover, but she learns that he has drowned or he has died falling from his horse, right? She will have no end and the poet will have no good. Actually, people try to convince poet's grief by telling him that he still has other friends, or that this loss is a common thing. Why he's pretending so much, why he's in so much grief. But Tennyson here uses a well-placed metaphor to illustrate or to define his point of view, right? To explain his point of view. And this advice to him is like a chef, the worthless pieces of hull that are left over when wheat is processed into grain. He says that just because people die, and this is a common occurrence, doesn't make his loss any easier to bear. Fathers lose their sons when their lives have only half been lived. He addresses mothers who have lost their sons, for example, at sea. Then he addresses lovers who have lost their beloveds. He uses here the sad example of a girl braiding her hair and waiting for a boyfriend to come. She imagines her anxiously waiting for his return, only to find out that he is drowned or has fallen off a horse. Because her beloved is gone, she will forever remain in the state of maidenhood, right? And there are so many ways people can die. There are so many ways, right? And but what is this second friend? To her perpetual maidenhood, and unto me no second friend. Unto me no second friend, right? Arthur was supposed to marry one of Tennyson's sisters, so maybe this canto is more personal than just describing the universal human condition of everyone, right? He says that there is no saying of second friend or no chance of second friend, right? Next is canto number 7. Dark house by which once more I stand, here in the long unlovely street doors where my heart was used to beat, so quickly waiting for a hand. Tennyson seems to be hanging around the place where his friend lived, which he characterizes as a dark house now. He says dark house. Now this house is characterized as a dark house. He once used to wait at that house for a hand, waiting for a hand that clasped his hand, but now he can't sleep and is creeping around the house in the early hours of the morning, since Tennyson knows his friend is not there anymore. Even though the neighborhood wakes up at earliest morning to the door, he is not there. The noise of the life begins, right? Life is still there, but the speaker says the breaking day is ghastly and blank. He says it is a blank day, plus it is a drizzling rain. The scene getting more depressing here, that everything is going on, the noise of life is still there, but he's waiting for a hand to be who clasped his hand, right? So he is getting more depressing here. Next is canto number 8. A happy lover who has come to took on her that loves him. A happy lover rings the doorbell of his beloved's home and discovers that she is not there. He grows sad and all his hopes are dashed. This is what the poet feels when he goes to the places where he and his friends used to meet. Now all is dark, where he feels that everything is dark here, right? He is he is not able to find out what he wants to see here. And Tennyson's poem is he feels that his friend is gone and all the places they once used to meet are not dark because he's not there. And here Tennyson's poem is like a flower that beloved woman once nurtured, but that has now been beaten down with wind and rain, right? Just as a grieving man might put a flower on the tomb of his beloved, Tennyson is going to plant this poem on his friend's tomb, right? If it doesn't bloom, it will at least to be close to him, right? At least that if it can, there may bloom, or dying there at least may die. So this is canto number 9. Fair ship that from the Italian shore sailets the placid ocean plays, with my lost Arthur's loved remains. With my lost Arthur's loved remains. Tennyson imagines he's there to see this ship carrying his friend home. The poet thinks of a ship, hearing its bell and seeing its cabin windows and the sailor at the wheel. And this ship brings home sailors to their wives and men from far away. A fancy strikes and the poet wonders if the ship might bring Arthur home. He is waiting for his friend to come back home. And he's still talking directly to the ship about how it is bringing something bad, that it is bringing his friends remains, right? And in contrast to the positive things, it usually brings sailors to their families, it brings men from afar, it brings letters to home, and but he's saying that this ship will bring his loved ones remains. And in next stanza, when the speaker urges the boat to bring his friend, gets a bit hectic. I hear the noise about thy keel, I hear the bell struck in the night. I see the cabin window bright, I see the sailor at the wheel. Thou bringest the sailor to his wife and travel men from foreign lands. Right? He says he uses the word I hear and I fear again and again. Actually, he emphasizes Tennyson's feeling of being there on the boat. He's still talking directly to the ship about it is bringing something bad. And the stanza, in this stanza, Tennyson thoughts not only spill over from line to line but also from stanza to stanza, right? He would much rather see his friend safely buried than to have his body lost at sea in the tangle. He says that should lost with tangle and with shells, right? He says that it is better to be buried than to be lost in the sea. And this image also sets off the more positive image of hands clasping also, right? Next is canto number 11. Here Tennyson says that nature is calm and the morning is silent. Peace reigns here and gossamers twinkle here, right? And light is still there. So this canto mirrors the poet's calm grief and calm despair, right? It is calm and it is peace everywhere. And canto number 12, as a dove. He is again imagining himself somewhere other than where he is. If you remember, firstly he describes himself as a mortal ark, meaning boat, and now as a dove that carries a sad message to heaven. A dove flies up to heaven to bring a sad story, her wings pulsing energetically, and the poet feels that similarly he cannot stay on earth. He wants to be a weight of nerves without a mind. He means he is pure in emotion or feeling without an intellect to comprehend it, right? He imagines himself floating around the ship and he sees his friend's body. He will sit and wonder, is this the end? And then he will return to his body and learn that he has been gone an hour, that I have been an hour away. Next is canto number 13, Tears of the Widower, when he sees a late lost form that sleep reveals. Now Tennyson is comparing himself with the widower who mourns his wife's death when he feels an empty space beside him in bed. He put his friend Arthur in the place of his wife. The widower will be silent and the poet will be silent too. He remembers that the friend he lost, who is now a spirit, not a breathing voice, right? He is a spirit now, and he's looking back over a long time to when Arthur's death was fresh in his mind. Time passes and there is a leisure to weep and to entertain fancies, such as his friends being on the ship, whose sails he observes coming in from the horizon. He describes the thing he has been talking about over the past couple of cantos as strange, which means foreign, or which means remote, because he has some distance on the event. He has a leisure for weeping now, right? Next is canto number 14. The whole canto, this canto number 14, it uses the word should many times. If you see, if one should bring me this report, then he says, should see thy passengers in rank, should strike a sudden hard, he should sorrow. So should word is it is used many times. Actually, should is the past conditional form of shall, that means possibility, right? Now again Tennyson engages himself in some more fanciful imaginings. These are things that are not necessarily happening but might happen or could happen, right? Here the speaker imagines that on this very day when he came to the ship and saw his friend stepping off it, he wouldn't be surprised. The poet says that he wouldn't be surprised by this at all because he regards his friend as half divine, right? And this word half divine, which links him with Jesus from the prologue. And if he would place his hand in the poet's hand and ask how things were at home, the poet would tell him all about his own life, that there would be no intimation of death or change. When he says no hint of death in all his frame, but found him all the same, I should not feel it to be strange. That there would be no intimation of death or change, he would not feel it to be strange. Last canto I am going to discuss is canto number 15, and if you want all these in written form or with more explanation, then you can email on the address given in the description box. In canto number 15, which is the last canto I am going to discuss, Tennyson discusses should his friend be brought back and how he would consider his resurrection as a natural event. And in this very canto he continues this analogy by depicting a kind of judgment day that heralds the coming of the kingdom of heaven, right? And the poem seeks to color the poet's emotions as images of fire and brimstone that stir the reader into empathizing with the depth of the poet's pain. The friend's death becomes as powerful and moving an event as Judgment Day itself. So friends, this is all about today's topic.